because they have COVID. So now there's different ways to look at that, I understand, but just to give us some structure and context around why Esper would be fired, he definitely, he got the ire of President Trump, and you have to look at what was going on. And we are live. This is Dark Journalist. What a fantastic crowd we have out there already. And I see Groovy Bean running the ship out there. It's good to see you, Groovy. We're going to have a nice, really deep insight update here on everything that's been going on. We'll do about an hour tonight just to catch us up on all of these interesting things that are happening, and in particular, the story I'm trying to draw attention to, which is this very unusual story of continuity of government, the COG underground base command over there. And we had some very interesting stories about this as the year moved along, which is the continuity of government people suddenly, from being the most secret people in the world, were, out there like celebrities and giving interviews on CNN and things of this nature. It's very unusual activity. It's like intelligence officers going on screen. You just don't do it. But they had their reasons, and this is really, 2020 was the year that COG came out, came out of the closet, because this thing has been a real problem going on out there. So we're going to get into that tonight, and the dust up that I had with Newsweek over it after I revealed their source for the article, who tried to stay anonymous. But I think with the incendiary things and the kind of fear mongering and fear porn that they were putting out there, I needed to go the extra mile to try and identify their source. And in fact, when I put it forward to them, Newsweek magazine did not deny it, but they did freak out online, and I'm going to show you the essence of that freak out right here. It's great to have everyone with us, and we won't be taking questions tonight because we don't have the lovely Olivia, but she'll be back very shortly because we're going to be doing X100, the episode to end all episodes, and it is a three-parter of the X series, and that is coming up on January 8th. And in between there on Friday, we're going to have another update around the election for you. So that three-parter is really going to be something that, for the X series, I think will connect all of these dots together, and it'll happen right after this kind of historic protest that's going on. That's going to happen in Washington, D.C. about Trump and all of the kind of Senate machinations with Vice President Pence overseeing the Electoral College vote in the Senate. This is a big and dramatic moment, and many things have been thrown around about it, and we're going to get into all of them tonight. And I have to say, everything is in play when it comes to the Trump election. So everything is both true and false. It's false that Biden won the election. Apparently, it's very, very clear. It's false that there was not voter fraud. There was extensive voter fraud. So the media has completely dropped the ball on this and has collaborated with those who have put this ball in play. But at the same time, there is a real chance of President Trump pulling this out, as obscure as that may be. And I want to go over that as well while the opportunity exists. This is another thing, which is they're bringing all these forces together to kind of do a test drive. And in the middle of all of this election friction that's been going on with the extensive voter fraud, which is just off the charts. I mean, it's kind of interesting. I just want to say, as someone who's watched many, many elections and does a lot of political research, I've never, ever seen anything like what they did with Biden, just rolling him out for these little, drive-in movie performances in front of a couple of Jeeps, and really keeping him in a basement the whole time. You cannot win an election like that unless you have extensive voter fraud going. And so what we were looking at there is not just typical voter fraud, which you always have in every election, and I'm not surprised by any of that. But this was something really exceptional. And they just decided, you know what, populism is out. We have to get Trump out at any cost because he's directly connected with that. And I would think that regardless of how anyone would feel about President Trump or whatever politics you're coming from, and I'm going to describe that tonight, which is, you know, there's this combination of people who need to come together. And I would say it's people coming from the libertarian side. Also, on the populist side, and you have on the populist side both heavy duty Trump supporters, but believe it or not, even Bernie supporters are on the populist side, because the Bernie people also understood the trade issues and the unfairness of working with China the way that we have. And this is something that Trump really pushed back on and did a spectacular job really reinventing our policies towards this incredibly abusive regime, which cares nothing about human rights and which really shouldn't have even been admitted into the World Trade Organization under the circumstances, unless things had improved. And of course, you know, we know that the Chinese people are some of the greatest, most loyal and dedicated people on the planet. But the government is, you know, and we have our own problems with our own government, but the government in China is ethically backward, and you know, they exploit their population, and that's what they want to do over here. They want to export that kind of government here through the likes of, you know, Mark Zuckerberg and others, and that gets us into the whole kind of world government aspect, which we can see very obviously now is not a conspiracy by any stretch of the imagination. And a number of people have been warning us about this setup. And interestingly enough, when you think about world government, you know, fundamentally, the people who originally put it together with the idea of, hey, these nations won't have wars anymore. And that whole process got hijacked by this kind of Rockefeller segment that didn't want any competition and try to figure out, you know, how do we just get rid of these people who are our rivals and take over. And they started to apply that more and more globally, and now they're heading towards this global digital currency. And there's no question that you're going to see a lot of strife as a result of this consolidation and centralization of power that we've been seeing and that we've been bringing to you all year long. I do want to mention, and this is quite fascinating, that at the beginning of the year, we did an episode about Jean Dixon, and we talked about the very unusual predictions that she made for 2020 and how Robert Merritt, who was the Nixon secret agent, who really had come forward at the end of his life and told me some really mind-boggling things about Nixon and what he had left behind in terms of UFO disclosure. Well, Merritt, as it turned out, had made a prediction, had heard a prediction that Nixon made about 2020, and that was in 1972. So my kind of analysis and deduction after the fact was that he had got that from his very good friend who had visited the White House 81 times, Jean Dixon. And so Jean Dixon was making these projections out there for 2020. And I have to say, if we go back and look at the work that she did, and if we think about some of the revelations in that episode, it's remarkable the amount of things that have come true from her predictions. And this is why I think these factors are kind of important, you know, that it's not just a kind of woo-woo corner over here. Which is why I'm going to bring in some astrological elements tonight when it comes to January 6th. And some of these are going to bring some interesting questions up about what's really going to happen here. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. This is our special update now, and it pertains to the Trump administration and the battle that's going on there, in an attempt by some continuity of government officials from NORTHCOM, who are trying to spread massive fear through a Newsweek article by one of Newsweek's top writers over there, William Arkin, who really ran for the hills as soon as I exposed his source on this, which was Terrence J. O'Shaughnessy, is what I put forward. And I'm going to get into why this matters. Arkin is somebody, he's an interesting mixed bag. This is somebody who's worked, you know, for the CIA. It's somebody who has a really long history of working around government, understands, was, you know, around military intelligence, and has a long career as a journalist. And as a matter of fact, a lot of very good journalists respect the amount of facts he's able to bring forward about often very clandestine operations going on in the government. But he also, as I've discovered in talking with Professor Peter Dale Scott, who knows, really has brought forward the continuity of government program, and we've had him on the show discussing it, and we really have brought that fact through, that the continuity of government program is a complete usurpation of the Constitution of the United States, and it's still in full effect, and in fact was invoked on September 11th by Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld. This is very serious because we've never actually gotten out of that state of emergency that we were put into on as a result of the September 11th attacks, and it was September 14th, 2001 when they put us in that position. So this underground government, the continuity of government people who exist as a counterpart to the regular government in the case of a massive emergency, you know, originally were brought on board because of nuclear reasons, because they thought in the 50s, hey, you know, we're going to get nuked potentially, and we need a whole underground setup in order to run things after the fact in case it's a surprise attack. So in fact, it was set up again with kind of lofty ambitions, but got taken over as time went along. And one of the things I want to point out is, you know, when we talk about the setup of the continuity of government, it's gone through these phases that, you know, something that Professor Scott has pointed out is that every deep event that's happened in American history, whether it was Watergate or the JFK assassination, which we're still waiting for the CIA records on, and hopefully Trump is going to make some of those moves as we move into the new year here. But this is pretty interesting to me because what I see is that, you know, when you go through time, September 11th events, Iran-Contra, all of these various aspects have some continuity of government players embedded. You know, in Watergate, it was John Dean. In the Kennedy assassination, it was people involved in planning the Dallas trip, the Secret Service agents. Winston Lawson had used the so-called Doomsday Network. In Iran-Contra, Oliver North. This is somebody who actually invoked continuity of government on the Senate floor when he was being grilled, and they all jumped out of their chairs to shut him up because he was trying to reveal the source from which he was using, and he was using this secret government, you know, it's really kind of widespread infrastructure, and it involves a communication network which you cannot track, and it's outside of the reach of the NSA or any of these things because of the nature of its ultra secrecy. The problem is when someone gets their hands on that and then abuses it, what do we do on the surface here? And that's the challenge that we're facing. So with all that in mind, and this is William Arkin, as I said, who's done, you know, a lot of research on continuity of government. The only problem is, as Professor Scott told me, is he leaves a lot of the key players out. He doesn't want to talk about the kind of Dick Cheney setup of the whole thing. He sort of has the kind of on the surface version of the whole thing, and it's a very superficial read, but a lot of facts. So I'm not saying that the guy doesn't have his act together as far as research goes. But what I was stunned by was in March, he started rolling out these continuity of government articles as if it was as common as ice cream. I mean, it's really quite remarkable. And continuity of government had been something which you couldn't even cite on the Senate floor. It was ultra secret. And when they went during the 9/11 Commission to get any information on whether or not it was invoked, and it was invoked on 9/11 by Vice President Dick Cheney, you know, they were told that you don't have the clearance for this, and that some of the top intelligence people don't have the clearance for it. So this thing is so ultra secret that we as citizens have no idea what's going on with it. And their excuse is, well, no one can ever find out because, but in terms of who's actually running it, all we get is the kind of command structure. And now for some reason in 2020, they decided with COVID and all of these, you know, the incredible crisis that was, you know, they were coping in the government with this thing coming out of nowhere, but then the media and all these things got on top of it and piggybacked this kind of fascist tone to the whole thing, you know, where they could lock you down and the Constitution didn't matter and all these. And we're in the middle of that right now. We have to throw all of that off. But I think what's important for us to remember in looking at this is the shape of this article and who Arkin is, you know, somebody who's worked around these things, who's written books on 9/11, who interacts with that deeper military industrial complex, somebody who has trained CIA analysts, given presentations for them. I mean, this is the nature of the connections that he has. And some people would say, well, that's a good thing. You know, he has those connections, he knows those people. But the problem is, you know, you wind up getting into their, you know, they wind up kind of invading your headspace and pointing you in this direction, that direction. And at the end of it, you're just, you know, basically the puppet, and whoever's pulling the strings is just anyone who's giving you the secret information. Okay, so the article was called Donald Trump's Martial Law Talk Has Military on Red Alert. This just came out last week. Pentagon and Washington area military leaders are on red alert. This is in the article. Wary of what President Donald Trump might do in his remaining days in office. Though far-fetched, ranking officers have discussed what they would do if the president declared martial law. Now, military commands responsible for Washington, D.C. are engaged in secret contingency planning in case the armed forces are called upon to maintain or restore civil order during the inauguration and transition period. This is very unusual for a lot of reasons. First of all, my question would be, where were you during the BLM riots, right? How about restoring order there? But basically, this is a direct allusion to the fact that, oh, Trump may use martial law, and so we have to like get ready to lock his crowd down. So it already started off with this fear tone, but as the tone went along, I started to recognize some of the hints of the person who was talking through, you know, as the anonymous general and talking through Arkin here. According to one officer who spoke to Newsweek on condition of anonymity, the planning is being kept out of sight of the White House and Trump loyalists in the Pentagon for fear that it would be shut down. Well, the president is the commander-in-chief. So if you are doing this planning, then you are basically putting yourself up to be, you know, tried for not responding to your chain of command and are subject to sanction. So let's go over that again. According to one officer who spoke to Newsweek on condition of anonymity, the planning, that is the secret contingency planning that the armed forces are doing, the planning is being kept out of the sight of the White House and Trump loyalists in the Pentagon for fear that it would be shut down. What are you talking about? So you're a secret unit that is going to control the government? And then by the same token, you're accusing Trump of using martial law? This is a real departure, this article. I've never seen it such lunacy in one Newsweek article. But as we go along here, it reveals itself, as do the sources. I've been associated with the military for over 40 years. Again, this is the anonymous source. And I've never seen the discussions that are being had right now, the need for such discussions, says a retired flag officer, currently a defense contractor who has mentored and advised his service's senior leader. He was granted anonymity in order to speak without fear of reprisal. Well, here's the thing. You have fear of reprisal because you're talking about usurping the role of the president by some secret contingency planning by some generals. So that's called a coup in America. And so this article, if your anonymous source is correct, are planning a coup outside of the purview of the commander-in-chief. This is an absolute outrage. And it's so blatant and in the open, and the article is kind of promoting it. They're like, yeah, good. In case Trump has martial law plans, we've got this whole secret contingency plan all set up. So it gets more along this line. And what it says further on is a half dozen officers in similar positions agree that while there's zero chance that the uniformed leadership would involve itself in any scheme to create an election-related reversal, they worry the military could get sucked into a crisis of Trump's making, particularly if the president tries to rally private militias and pro-Trump paramilitaries in an effort to disrupt the transition and bring violence to the Capitol. This is extraordinary. So the fear-mongering goes on, and it's all baseless. But they keep going back to this retired general, and his familiarity with Trump started to bother me. And I checked with my own sources, and that was one kind of confirmation. But just going through this, I have done a lot of coverage on someone, as you may know, who is the continuity of government retired NORTHCOM general, and he gave up the position to Admiral Van Herk, General Van Herk, on August 20th, and that's Van Herk accepting the NORTHCOM and COG command on August 20th. But his name is Terrence J. O'Shaughnessy, and I've covered him because he was the first COG NORTHCOM commander to come out and say, you know, this is around the pandemic time, oh, you know, here I am, I'm the continuity of government planner. And Arkin was suggesting at the time that everyone was going to have to get to know his name because he was the combatant commander of the United States. And if Trump got COVID, God forbid, this guy would be in charge, which is actually not true. So there are a lot of strange things going on here, and I think that we'll find as we look into October, when Trump did get COVID, that they did attempt to invoke COG, and that's the reason that Defense Secretary Mark Esper was fired after the election. O'Shaughnessy was born in Canada, and he has a very distinguished military career and served NORTHCOM well and all the rest. The unusual thing in all this is his familiarity in tone, this retired officer, with President Trump. And, you know, if you go back, and it said he was retired, but if you go back and you look at who was directly behind O'Shaughnessy in that chain of people who ran COG, you will find that it was in fact a woman general who was before him. And she came in 2016, so there's no way that that general would have any familiarity with Trump. So it's very easy to pinpoint it as O'Shaughnessy. And that's what I put forward based on my own reading of the article and logical deduction, along with my own sources. Now, interestingly enough, these guys over at Newsweek, they had a very interesting reaction to it. I'm going to share this with you. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. We're here with a special update on this Newsweek COG Trump controversy. And it's great to have, it's a huge crowd tonight. We have Groovy Bean out there running the show, and it's great to have everyone with us. I want to remind you while I'm finding this to go to the Dark Journalist website and sign up for our newsletter. Now that's something which comes out literally just once a week and lets you know what shows are coming up. And it also, you know, it gives us kind of the ability, if ever these social media networks go down, to kind of get in touch and to make sure that you and I have that kind of rapport going on. So it gives us a direct pipeline, which I feel is important. The other thing I want to mention is that my kind of all-star stellar interview with Jim Marrs from 2016. Now, this is a 4-year-old classic with the late Jim Marrs on 9/11, was unceremoniously removed by YouTube for hate speech. Yes, when you get to the bottom of things, they just call it hate speech and get rid of it. But that's the first real thing that they've done in relation to my channel. So it's all the more important to make sure you're signed up for that newsletter. And, you know, amazingly enough, that was, you know, that whole thing was about 9/11. And so, you know, the only hate speech is if somebody is trying to protect Cheney or Bush, I guess. But otherwise, it was an incredibly logical presentation by Jim Marrs, nothing even approaching anything like what they were talking about. But that's the road they're going to take. And I believe that what they're trying to do with Biden is actually introduce an order, an executive order that would prevent people, they use something like the Nashville thing, which there's so many questions about, with the Nashville bombing and, this guy sort of blowing everything up there. Nobody died except him, and it's a strange story. Again, we've been seeing a lot of strange stories around the grid, and this one knocked out communications because of AT&T. So, we have to kind of keep our eyes on things a little bit more than usual, I would say, with all of the things going on. And this idea of these COG, planners, contingency planning for something and keeping it outside the view of Trump, who's the commander in chief. I mean, it's extraordinary. And I think really that someone should investigate that Newsweek article. And that's why I'm bringing it forward. Because, is he just blowing smoke, or is that an actual operation that's in place? Because if it is, it's in terrible violation of the law and the Constitution, and those people should be reported immediately. But in any case, what we did have is, I pointed this out in a very straight ahead manner to Newsweek. And so I put this up, I tweeted this right before Christmas. More continuity of government rumblings in the media to deal with the possible legal Trump victory. The retired COG NORTHCOM commander quoted was Terrence J. O'Shaughnessy, although he preferred to be anonymous. That was my take on the whole situation. Like it or not. And then out of the blue, William Arkin, who we met earlier in the show, who is one of these kind of foreign policy, national defense analysts, writers, authors for the Newsweek, has been with Newsweek for years, used to be with NBC News, New York Times, and others. So Arkin responds, the retired NORTHCOM commander was not named. The news is hard enough without stupid and false information. But you might notice something that goes on in journalistic circles there, which is he did not deny that it was, in fact, General O'Shaughnessy. So I put up there, Newsweek getting nervous at my idea of the anonymous quoted source as retired COG NORTHCOM commander Terrence J. O'Shaughnessy. This article is a fear-mongering attempt by continuity of government insiders to stop an honest look at the 2020 election by legal means. And that's exactly how it reads. And I think that this article is such a hallmark, and I want to point everyone to it. And I would say that in general, Arkin's work around COG has always gotten into areas and then drop the ball because he doesn't want to take you into what actually goes on. So it's always been a little bit superficial in that sense, although he obviously has, as I've suggested, he obviously has a good amount of skill going in and understanding who the players are. But in this case, we found him quoting this anonymous source who was saying all these wild things about Trump and martial law and how there's a group in the military set up to like put down any revolt that Trump makes. I mean, this was crazy, crazy stuff. And we know that they call out other groups and, they call everyone a conspiracy theorist who even thinks a little bit differently. This was really wild stuff. And if it was true, needed to be investigated thoroughly because he's talking about basically, it's a mutiny by military officers. Okay, but let's keep going. So that was my second take, which is, and there's his response. This all takes place on Twitter on Christmas, just before Christmas. And that was Arkin saying the retired NORTHCOM commander was not named. But he didn't say it was not Terrence J. O'Shaughnessy because it was. And then a little further on, I wrote Newsweek getting nervous at my ID, and Arkin, who has a very long and distinguished career, decided that you are a fool, Captain Kangaroo. is more like your speed. Yes. Arkin called dark journalist Captain Kangaroo. This is very interesting to me because it's well known when you go into journalism and if you're in a case and you're probing somebody trying to get something from them, it's what they freak out at that becomes the thread that you can follow. And there was no reason, he could have easily denied, well, this is not O'Shaughnessy, I have an anonymous source. Instead, he said the anonymous source was not named as O'Shaughnessy. Well, that's right, because you said he was anonymous, but who was it? Obviously, it was O'Shaughnessy, and that was my take on it, and I put my take out there. So Captain Kangaroo is a weird reference for a lot of reasons. A lot of people don't even know who Captain Kangaroo is. This is a weird morning daytime show for kids with this character, and I don't think there was anything wrong with Captain Kangaroo, actually. So it's not that good of an insult. But it is very interesting that as I called out O'Shaughnessy and this wild tale that he was giving to Arkin, and if it wasn't O'Shaughnessy, then Arkin had carte blanche to say it right there and then, but he didn't. So instead, he went freaky and said, oh, you're a fool, which is kind of interesting. What exactly does that mean? I mean, are you wrong if you're a fool? Okay, I mean, there's a lot of interesting things going on there. And so Arkin put Newsweek in this position of shutting down honest inquiry here. And then if you look through that thread, everyone was like, obviously Arkin is hiding something, and his response was ridiculous ad hominem. So when we're looking at that, we know that the mainstream media had a real problem there because they were trying to put this meme out there. Trump's going for martial law, and we've got this tough military COG team ready to take him out if that's what happens. To take out whatever insurrection happened. It was like this. The article is such incredible fear porn. I can't even believe it. And then ultimately, Arkin and Newsweek just blocked dark journalists straight up. They didn't want that conversation to go any further. That's the very height of professionalism. But as I say, if you can't take the COG heat, get out of the COG secrecy kitchen. It's very simple. But Arkin, who's been in this circle for a long time, lost it. He dropped the ball and he freaked out at the identification of O'Shaughnessy. Now, I didn't point that out just to get a reaction out of Arkin. I pointed it out because O'Shaughnessy was in charge of COG, and we know COG operates largely as a completely unconstitutional entity, assuming powers and, giving police powers over to the NORTHCOM base over North America. I mean, this is only something we've had to live with since 9/11. And I don't think many Americans are aware of the fact that every year when the president signs the NDAA, he is signing on to the September 11th emergency planning. And we're still under that umbrella state of emergency, which means they can do all these things because they're still working with emergency. Hello, COVID emergency over here. We're getting the same kind of connect on that. They're using, the governors use emergency powers that they don't have. There's no force of law in any governor's edict. If they try to sue you or fine you for not wearing a mask in public when no one else was around, it's absurd. There's no force of law in any of that. If you took that to court, you'd win. So this is the big secret, which they're like, oh, the governor said it, so it must be the law. Well, it ain't, to put it simply. And we have to keep that in mind because these people are creating all kinds of powers unto themselves, just like the COG people. So we have a real crisis of authoritarian control going on, and we need to have the wherewithal to point it out because it seems like they're getting ready for, a demonstration. And they probably would even provoke violence or have a false flag and say, oh, the Trump people are causing all this kinds of thing. Look, anyone who goes to a protest, on the populist side would be upset with the nature of the voter rigging. And that doesn't go to just Trump people. It would go to any side if it were uncovered that, as we've seen when the Democrats stiffed Bernie twice. But Bernie, he had the ability to call it out and he didn't. So he gets, he sort of deserves it in a sense. But if it does get called out, then we're looking at a larger picture of what do we do in a system where voter fraud can come forward and really change the results of an election. And if all of these really key analysts looking at it say, well, these numbers are just, beyond the pale, there are actually 200,000 more voters, votes in Pennsylvania than voters. So, these things have to be accounted for. You're going to have to account for them in some sense. They even had Senate hearings about election irregularities. That's a start. So it's not like we're talking out of school here. Everyone knows there's a problem. The question is, what's the remedy? And that's really where the question should go. But the media is just making it and hyping it, very much like this article. But if we round this picture out and we think about O'Shaughnessy and we think about his role in being a very public figure around the continuity of government command, and that continuity of government being really created as a very unconstitutional structure to form a second government. And there are all kinds of questions that need to be opened up there, and to the public, they owe an explanation. Now, when we look at the Newsweek article, it's a real flash of that, because what they're saying in essence is, oh, we think that Trump, they're whipping up this fear that Trump would cause martial law and use the military. But instead, while they're saying, oh, Trump is planning this, they are on the record. They have secret contingency planning. This is a direct quote in the article. Secret contingency planning out of the sight of the commander-in-chief or Pentagon officials that are favorable to Trump. I mean, that is the living, example of mutiny. What else can you say about it? So what is it that the writer was telling us? Did he get it right? And if that's what's going on, then he better reveal his source, and those people should be talked to, because this is something that they've gone on the record with, and they're trying to kind of create that fear atmosphere, as I've pointed out. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. We're here going through this COG Newsweek controversy and the whole Trump martial law meme, fear porn that's been going around. Now, I think when we look at Trump, we can see that, they're looking at him and thinking, well, he knows that there's been a lot of voter fraud. And so they're trying to preempt anything that he would do. Shortly after the election took place, Trump did some interesting things where he fired Defense Secretary Mark Esper, which is an unusual step. And Esper is somebody who had changed up the COG command and had inserted General Van Herk. And General Van Herk, who comes out of the 509th, by the way, which is the same outfit that Jesse Marcel, who did the Roswell recovery all the way back to 1947, comes out of. Well, this was strange because in that exchange, they had O'Shaughnessy resign, or retire rather, with honors, and but he was only 54, so it seems kind of young and oddly timed, right in the middle of the whipped up pandemic. So that gets you thinking right off the bat. Let's think about that one. Then, taking the next leap, Esper appoints Van Herk, who comes out of this 509th legacy. Then in October, there's a lot of very strange messaging that takes place when Trump gets the COVID virus, and very quickly recovers, mind you, within maybe 2 days. It was just miraculous, really. But there were a lot of questions about where he was as a result of some videos that were taken, and Dr. Joseph Farrell on this program claimed that he was on a ship. So that doesn't really equate with what they were saying with him being at Walter Reed Army Hospital. So there were some strange things that were going on there. And I believe that he was looking at that. Trump was looking at it and saying, after the fact, this was a COG attempt. They were going to try and place him and Pence out of power and saying we need to do this COG thing because they have COVID. So now there's different ways to look at that, I understand, but just to give us some structure and context around why Esper would be fired, he definitely, he got the ire of President Trump, and you have to look at what was going on there in that relationship for him to get axed. My take on it is it was his appointing this different COG commander. And then also what was going on with O'Shaughnessy retiring on August 20th, 2020. This is all, to me, very unusual activity. And then by the time you get to this article with Arkin going way out on a limb, saying these generals are planning outside of the purview of the commander-in-chief, I mean, that's like the 7 days in May scenario. It is literally generals taking things into their own hands. So there was enough to go on to go back to O'Shaughnessy, who was his key source, that is Arkin's key source, in all of the articles that he had put out pertaining to this whole situation earlier. And so, March, April, he puts out these COVID things, and he said, let's get everyone to know Terrence J. O'Shaughnessy, because Terrence J. O'Shaughnessy is the combatant commander of the United States, and he may have to take over, because if Trump and his team get COVID, guess what? It's going to be President Terrence. But thank God that didn't happen. But what do they have? And this is the thing about COG, is you always have to keep an eye on them, because under any emergency situation, they can recreate this scenario in a heartbeat, which is why we need to go back and strip out the secrecy around COG and create an entirely new constitutional-based structure instead of this thing, which over and over again, like the deep state, and it's always around deep state activities, those deep events are always related to continuity of government players. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. Here we are now, deep in the COG, a continuity of government controversy.
Greetings. My name is Barry Setterfield. Welcome.
Crowd out there tonight, just fantastic. And it's great to have so many of you with us. I'm going to do maybe another 20 minutes on this report. And like I said, we do have a 3-part X series finale for the 100th episode. That's episode 100, part 1, part 2, and part 3, which will start on January 8th. And this Friday, we'll be giving you a big update as well. So all those things are coming up. I want to remind you to go to the Dark Journalist website at darkjournalist.com and make sure you sign up for our newsletter there. This is something that can really help us stay in touch if, as it looks like the handwriting's on the wall, they're going to start throwing off, they've already thrown off so many people from social media. My God, it's absurd that we live in the kind of censorship world that we do. But, getting the jump on all this, if you and I are on the same page and you're signed up for our newsletter, then basically once a week, we're going to let you know what shows are coming up. I can tell you some of the greatest interviews and some of the greatest X series shows are waiting there in January. So you don't want to miss it. And so make sure you're on board with us there. I see Groovy Bean running the show out there, and it's great to have her with us. I wanted to address something that has been floating around, and I think it's important for people to have a lot of different takes on how things could go down in relation to the Electoral College and the Trump election, which I'm calling Trump 2021, or election 2021, actually, because what we have really to look at here is there are a lot of different scenarios that could play out. So we are kind of in the ideas room around this. So one of those things that's been floated out there are the powers of the vice president in the Constitution to, in fact, reject certain electors if he suspects voter fraud in relation to the electors. It is true that Trump has this ability. When they go, that Pence has this ability, actually, and when they go out in the media trying to say that he does not have that authority, they're lying. What they could say is, he has the authority. It probably wouldn't be wise to use it, because you'd want to be able, as part of a kind of a portfolio of things, to bring that forward and say, well, we have proof of voter fraud here. We have the Supreme Court taking a case here. We have these whistleblowers around this and this piece of evidence here, and we have these alternate electors here, and there's a problem. So that's a kind of a panorama. You know, we've seen a lot of these things come up, but they would need to close the picture on these things between now and January 6th, so that Pence would have something to go on in rejecting any electoral slate. Now, in 7 states, they do have alternate electors, which under the Constitution, they are able to submit. Those states have the abilities to have alternate electors. So there may be arcane rules around this, sure, but it is a real factor. However, you can't imagine Pence taking the weight of the world on his shoulders and making that decision by himself. He would need the entire Trump team to have that real panorama of evidence backing him, and then all of that would go forward. What may happen is something significant between here and January 6th, because if you look, there's a lot of things going on with Sidney Powell, and there is this thing, all eyes on Mike Pence as Congress prepares to officially declare 2020 presidential election winner. Republicans are arguing Pence has unilateral authority to accept or reject any state's electoral votes. It's actually true. Interestingly enough, that is the power that the vice president has, and that is how the 1876 election was decided, because it was rife with voter fraud. It's one of the only ones that we have on record. And, I would say the Bush versus Gore is another one that could use as a kind of example in this. So these are the things that we're looking at here. And I have to say that, the scenarios about Pence, it seems to me, are more about what he could do. And so there's a could do, should do thing there. How do you get hearts and minds on board with this? What you do, very much like John F. Kennedy did in the Cuban Missile Crisis, you present evidence of what the other side did. And this is the nature of what we've seen. And I think that we would need that kind of evidence to come forward. Now, Sidney Powell put out a 270-page voter fraud document. This thing is very comprehensive. Powell is the single leading powerhouse with the ability to completely blow the voter fraud charges out of the water and expose some people. The thing is, the work that she's doing, I believe the cases that she's working on, they do require time, and the time window is tight. So what is it that's in the arsenal there that would work in a scenario like this? Well, just as Millie Weaver mentioned when she was on the program here on December 18th, there are things that are hanging in the air around the Trump campaign. And it is about information that they have and things that they've seen in relation to voter fraud. And I think that they're looking at that information and figuring out how to present it. And we have to all wonder what kind of a scenario that would be and how much of a difference would it make. Now, if there were smoking gun evidence of fraud, as people have suggested, like the Overstock CEO has suggested this, Patrick Byrne, who's got a very deep knowledge base and knows a lot of the players involved, and actually met with Trump on December 21st at the White House, and had some kind of dark things to say in relation to the White House counsel and the people around Trump who are just trying to convince him not to rock the boat, which is kind of doesn't seem very likely somehow. So there is this whole thing, which is, this is the whole establishment going at it, because they've decided to pull the rug out from Trump, do the voter fraud part, and Trump is caught in a situation trying to, it's like we're all aware of the fraud, but you need a process. Where is the process? And we've had some processes legally that have been rejected, but remember, a lot of the people rejecting those things whether it was the Supreme Court or whether it was the Democrat judges, they fear to get involved in it, because when you get into voter fraud, the whole system, there's so much of it. So many people could be involved in going to jail on this, and there's so many connections involved. And then you have the Chinese money kind of sitting over the whole process. And even a lot of those Republicans that are in the Senate who didn't support Trump, which seems kind of unthinkable considering he's in their party. But remember, Trump is kind of his own thing. I mean, he really is on the populist side, and the Republicans aren't really populist by a long shot. So they're working kind of with the Democrats in that uniparty aspect. So we have to look at this situation and say, well, what is it that we really have going on? We have a stolen election, one. We have all of these lockdowns and the governors using unconstitutional means, two. And that needs to be rejected by citizens in America and all over the world. But America can really be the leading beacon on this. We're seeing more and more stats come out, whether it's about, there's no asymptomatic spread, or there are other things that worked, like ivermectin, whatever it was. There were a number of things that could have been brought to bear instead of everyone bowing down at the altar of the DNA vaccine, the Franken vaccine, as it were. So this is the nature of the situation we find ourselves in. And then we've had this battle, legal battles, just drilling down to the Trump-Biden election. And what's gone on is, half of the population, over half in a recent poll, believe that there was some real voter fraud in the election, even Democrats. So we know that it took place, and the question is, what's the remedy? Where do you go from here? And people like Arkin, who are writing with Newsweek and talking to these very, very, inflammatory generals behind the scenes, they're trying to create this thing that Trump, because he objected to the voter fraud, is trying to create a martial law situation. And I have to say, it seems to me as if Trump has really resisted a lot of those calls to use those types of powers. And he is a very canny political persona as well. And that's how he got in the White House in the first place. Make no mistake about it. He's not somebody who's just some impulsive guy, although he can act like that at times. I would say with Trump, what he's doing is weighing all of his options. And if they are able to rifle through this Biden administration on the fraud side, the thing that I think the Trump machine could do is they could say, here's a special counsel to investigate the voter fraud. That seems to be where they were headed with Sidney Powell around December 21st, which is the meeting that Patrick Byrne was at also. And there was some hubbub after that, and Powell apparently is not talking in the White House at this point. So there's a kind of a phalanx around the presidency that is keeping everyone out. But ultimately, Trump, he actually met with Roger Stone, who also who he pardoned, and who Stone got a chance to thank in person, according to a recent article. So when we're looking at that, we're getting some idea of what's going on there, because of course Stone knows a lot about politics and the politics of the special counsel, and gave him the advice, here's how you would basically lay that out. So Trump is up in the air looking at this and saying, what is it that I do? In the middle of all this, you have this Georgia runoff, which is going to determine Democratic or Republican control of the Senate. So we are really in quite a pickle there, time-wise. You've got the Trump rally in Georgia on January 4th for his two Republican candidates, Kelly Loeffler and her counterpart. Then we have January 5th, the runoff, which brings voter fraud into play again. Are the same people going to use voter fraud again to try to throw out these Republicans so the Democrats can take over and have phony Biden president and phony control of the Senate? Or are they going to have, are the two candidates going to succeed and the Republicans will maintain control of the Senate? It's huge. It's actually right on par with the presidential election. And then January 6th, we have this electoral college meet. In truth, I can tell you from my own examination of the election that neither candidate actually has 270 votes as of right now, tonight. And what's interesting is the numbers that they're giving, 306 for Biden and 232 for Trump. You know, Arizona, the key for Arizona was about 4,000 votes. And there were a lot of problems and irregularities in that election. In the Georgia election, there were all the things about matching signatures that they never did. That was also an incredibly, it's like 11,000 votes. I think it went under that, actually. And then we have this crazy situation in Pennsylvania where you have 200,000 more votes than voters. So, you know, Wisconsin and Michigan are their own thing, but just these are a problem. So a lot of those states appointed alternate electors, and there are actual senators in the House and the Senate now who are actually looking at this and saying, we're going to raise hell on January 6th, and we're going to say we won't accept those electors because the numbers are skewed and it looks like voter fraud. So it leads to, you know, a lot around those 48-hour period, January 4th to January 6th. And then there's a massive Trump rally that's taking place also on January 6th. And they'll be basically surrounding the Capitol. And so you will feel that presence there that day. And they have every right in the world to do it as well. So I think it's a very telling point. And so whatever has been set in motion with this voter fraud is coming to a head right around there. So if they are able to rifle Biden through, that'll be one kind of a timeline. But if they do have evidence of voter fraud, and we know already that they have a lot of evidence on his son. So, you know, we're looking in a very, very dicey situation. I know something came out, I wanted to mention this, which is Pence's wife posted something. Yeah, well, basically, this was supposed to be Pence's wife, but in any event, I'll double check on that. But in any event, the actual story is, for those who are not aware of yesterday's events, let me bring you up to speed. Ukrainian officials announced during a huge press conference that is being hidden by world media that Burisma officials have testified under oath that Biden received kickbacks from the $1 billion in taxpayer money for the Ukraine after firing the prosecutor investigating them. This is a real story. I don't know if Karen Pence actually did that, because we have so much people imitating other people online. But this is, the story itself has come through several very reputable news sources, that there is that Burisma Ukraine deep, deep story that is breaking. And we know that Biden is incredibly vulnerable on that. Is it possible that things could move that fast? Yes, it is possible that things could move that fast, and that case could go and explode overnight as we get into the first week of January. So it is a real roller coaster ride. And I think what's important for us to kind of put on the record here is that we're in the middle one of this election battle, which involves intense voter fraud, the likes of which we've never seen in America. We've never seen a more enfeebled candidate entering office as Vice President Biden. So it is a very tricky situation for the United States. And we have to look at this and press the issue to the extent that we can. And I feel that there's a lot of potential leading up to January 6th, especially if some of this evidence that's been talked about by Trump people behind the scene comes more to the fore. I do feel they have enough evidence on the record with Sidney Powell's work and Giuliani's and the rest to literally throw those 7 states out. I don't think there's any question. But how is it all going to play out, and how do you get everyone on board with it? At the same time, if they do try to rifle Biden in, how do you get everybody who has seen the voter fraud to follow along? It becomes a very, very dangerous, tenuous situation for the United States, there's no question. Everyone, you're watching The Dark Journalist Show. We're in the middle of an update here, just giving you that overview. And we talked about the COG Newsweek controversy. I still can't believe, and I highly recommend people go to this article and comment on it. They'll probably block you like maybe you'll get called Captain Kangaroo too, but it'll feel a little bit better with other people involved. It's just amazing to me, the tone of this article, which is basically, yeah, go generals, take over the presidency. I mean, it's just seemed like more people losing their minds. And this is somebody who's like, you know, a respected writer, like just seemed very out of character. And then there's, when I caught the tone of the quotes they were getting, I was like, this sounds like O'Shaughnessy, and he's the one who worked with Trump, so this is kind of a no-brainer. And this was their response, which was to freak out and block me. So you always know you're getting somewhere close if they're doing that. So a couple more quotes from that article I just want to get into. And again, this is all around this January 6th thing. So maybe there is something that they're worried about here, and maybe we should be looking a little closer at this. Officers who are willing to speak about the subject insisted on anonymity, fearful that the use of their names might provoke the ire of the president. Yeah, and it should. They feared that publicly stated opposition to the president's scheme to undermine the election, whether that is to proclaim martial law, to seize voting machines, or even to halt Congress from ratifying state electors' results on January 6th, could actually embolden Trump to act. Well, first of all, if they feel there's been a crime committed, Trump could instruct the Department of Justice to seize the voting machines. I mean, that's not outside the purviews of his powers. And why wouldn't you want, if there was, you know, some question about the election, why wouldn't you want those voter machines seized? I mean, what do you got to hide? So they seized the machines. According to your story, everything was hunky-dory. They go in there, they seize the machines, they go through machines, they find everything was hunky-dory. They don't have a case. So what's the problem? Why is that listed in the menu? It's very unusual. And then at that point, there's no telling what the president might do in the next month, says a former Northern Command NORTHCOM commander. Listen close, this is O'Shaughnessy. That's who I've deduced that this is speaking and who they freaked out about. Who has been intimately involved in the development of domestic civil planning. Yeah, fits the bill. Though I'm confident that the uniformed military leadership has their heads screwed on right, the craziness is unprecedented and the possibilities are endless. The retired flag officer also requested anonymity because he's actively advising senior officers and is not authorized to speak on the record. Well, you know, if you're going to say things like this, and it's going to involve martial law and secret generals planning, I'm sorry, you're going to have to go on the record. And I just put you on the record. So if it's not you, Newsweek can deny it and, you know, move on from there. But instead, they basically refused to deny it. And they wouldn't say that it wasn't him. Now, what's interesting to me is we've been keeping a close eye on the COG players on this, and this seems to be a really bold move on their part. One more thing from this article. They were talking about whether Trump would try to rerun the election. Okay, and if it was in his powers to do so. If they had proof of voter fraud, that is undeniable proof of voter fraud. Now, they have undeniable proof in individual cases. You know, they have, for example, as I mentioned, Pennsylvania, 200,000 more votes than voters. But I'm saying if you had the kind of smoking gun thing, you know, like we saw them when they were pulling out the suitcases from under the desks and stuff, it's so overwhelming, the amount of voter fraud that they have in their hands. But if they had something which it sounds like they do have in their hands, which is just another twist around that, which gets things a little more in the realm of, you know, we have evidence of, say, a foreign player like China in the election. And we already know there have been a lot of steps along the way that prove this, and that if no court will hear it or the Supreme Court stays away from it, how do you get it heard? But it's my kind of feeling that if you get to that point, then you have to talk about throwing the state electors out because they had been put in there under false pretenses. Then you have the second slate of electors. My guess is instead of appointing the second slate of electors, they just throw all those states out, 4 in particular of the Magnificent Seven. And those 4 would swing the whole election back to a point where neither candidate scored 270 electoral votes, which is what I have on my true map. And as a result of that, the election goes into the House of Representatives, where every state gets a vote. And under those circumstances, Trump has a 4-vote advantage. Now, it's a long way to getting from here to there on January 6th, but that is an actual layout of how it's done. There's obviously there's some other shoe that's going to drop between now and January 6th. That part is very clear. So that as these election updates happen, I'm going to be right here giving you that information. And I want to say that it's great to have everyone out there tonight. I want to remind you all to go to darkjournalist.com. And we are going to have a triple play finale of the 100th episode. It's not the finale of the series by a long shot, but it's a 3-parter X100 episode, and it starts on Friday, January 8th. And before that, of course, we'll come back for you with a New Year's update. And it's great to have so many people out there. I think it's absolutely exceptional, the year that we've all been through. And we've all seen some remarkable things and incredible power grabs, mostly. And we've also seen some great heroes like Sidney Powell, who, as I pointed out with Sidney Powell, she has taken on cases that were at that federal or Supreme Court level and flipped 70 of them to a different result that she started with. So she'd go in, somebody would say this person's guilty, or whatever it is, and she'd go in and flip the case. So her 40 some odd years of legal history is phenomenal. So she's not someone to be underestimated by a long shot. Patrick Byrne's description of Sidney Powell is she could bite the butt off a bear, and I don't doubt it for a moment. One of the things that strikes me as interesting is that Trump is somebody, in looking at this whole situation, sizing up his options, that they're trying to portray as this out of control lunatic, who needs to stay in the White House no matter what. No, I think that he's weighing his options, and Trump didn't get to the place that he got by being just some impulsive person, working off the hook. I mean, he's somebody who really has those deep connections, and he is looking at all the options and weighing out what to do. So I think we're in a fascinating position. I don't expect a huge rescue by someone like Mike Pence. I think what it would happen is the structure would have to be brought forward over the course of the next week of what they have, and that would form the basis of being able to reject the electors involved. There are really good sound reasons for rejecting those electors. There's no question about it. And I think if they were playing for real, they would have to, especially, in terms of Arizona and Pennsylvania and Georgia, they'd have to reject them based on the information. So that's why I think we have the alternate electors, but there's a lot to be seen between now and then. Now, a couple of strange things that have popped up, and I'll wind up with this, is that in the middle of all this, there was the West Virginia fireball / UFO. I should mention also that, it's very strange that when COG moved their command base to Cheyenne Mountain during the whole COVID kickoff, sometime around March 30th, actually, there were UFO sightings around that base, which led me to believe that they were maybe testing something or something else was going on. But whenever you see these things going on, and then you hear, the whole UFO sighting thing kicks up, or you see fireball suddenly off the charts. And I've been tracking this now since 2018, but the fireball activity is like nothing we've ever seen. And where does that go? Because it's not all meteorites. We have ways to predict that. So what is it that's happening? Okay, video of a blazing flying object spotted in West Virginia skies triggers UFO debates online. This was and is remarkable, and I highly recommend checking out the video, Burning UFO Falls over West Virginia. and that's more of it there on YouTube. This is an exceptional situation, and as far as I'm concerned, the UFO activity is so close around this, as we saw all of those kind of, you know, strange UFO cases come up during December, one of which but the fireball activity is this. There was the West Virginia, you know, working. The structure would have to be brought forward over the course of the next week of what they have, and that would form the basis of being able to reject the electors involved. There are really good sound reasons for rejecting those electors. There's no question about it. And I think if they were playing for real, they would have to, especially, I mean, in terms of Arizona and Pennsylvania and Georgia, they'd have to reject them based on the information. So that's why I think we have the alternate electors, but there's a lot to be seen between now and then. Now, a couple of strange things that have popped up, and I'll wind up with this, is that in the middle of all this, there was the West Virginia fireball / UFO. I should mention also that, you know, it's very strange that when COG moved their command base to Cheyenne Mountain during the whole COVID kickoff, sometime around March 30th, actually, there were UFO sightings around that base, which led me to believe that they were maybe testing something or something else was going on. But whenever you see these things going on and then you hear, you know, the whole UFO sighting thing kicks up, or you see fireball suddenly off the charts. And I've been tracking this now since 2018, but the fireball activity is like nothing we've ever seen. And where does that go? Because it's not all meteorites. You know, we have ways to predict that. So what is it that's happening? Okay, video of a blazing flying object spotted in West Virginia skies triggers UFO debates online. This was and is remarkable, and I highly recommend checking out the video, Burning UFO Falls Over West Virginia. And that's more of it there on YouTube. This is an exceptional situation, and as far as I'm concerned, the UFO activity is so close around this, as we saw all of those kind of, you know, strange UFO cases come up during December, one of which we pointed out here, the whole Batman balloon one, and the strange case that there was a website put up on a Thursday that got the drop on the UAP task force, a leak from them, and then put out the information about the Batman balloon UFO on Friday, that Friday, a day after being in business, and CNN picks that up. Think about that chain of events. CNN would have to be aware of who was that putting together that site. They would have to be aware that the UAP task force had given them information. I mean, so many things. So what's going on there? There's still, like we've said with the groups like To the Stars Academy, TTSA, the CIA rollout of UFO disclosure, their own version of this whole thing, and portraying a UFO threat. This is what we've been in the middle of with all this and where they're going. So this is how I see what they've really been up to. And a little news flash, which is that Luis Elizondo has quit the To the Stars Academy, and Christopher Mellon has also moved on from To the Stars Academy. I believe that they think that they're joining a Biden administration. And they may have counted that a little too soon, and we'll find out, of course, on January 6th. What's fascinating about it also is it seems to me that there's been a real kind of blowout around this, which is that the CIA trying to create the UFO threat, they've had some problems, and the TTSA has kind of at times created a sort of a bozo atmosphere. And I think that they've decided, you know, we were going to use DeLong for all this, and we had this whole thing set up with Elizondo. But, you know, there's been a lot of people on the independent side, myself, John Greenwald, and others, who really have blown the cover of the CIA operation. And sadly, there's been a lot of people involved on the UFO side who bought it hook, line, and sinker, or just wanted to be part of the TV series. Well, the TV series is over now because the ratings were so terrible. So they'll have to get you involved in some other projects, I guess. But it is interesting. I think it's better to hold on to your integrity and forget about all of that TV stuff. Just keep doing your work. Okay. NORAD, NORTHCOM moved personnel to Cheyenne Mountain bunker amid pandemic. That's what I referred to. That happened on March 30th. I believe that that is significant. And I believe that this part of the COG activity and part of the reason I think that O'Shaughnessy retired the way that he did and that Esper replaced him with Van Herk was because one of the things that O'Shaughnessy said was, we've had so many high-level visitors here, you wouldn't believe it, we didn't have room for them. They didn't have room for them at the Cheyenne Mountain COG Mega Center bunker. I mean, think about that. But I think that it was that quote that actually blew the story for O'Shaughnessy, because that's a very telling thing. And who were all these high-level people, and why were they visiting your bunker? And why were you there in the bunker? I mean, there were too many questions around that one. A couple of quick things I picked up as we leave off here. And again, it's great to have everyone here. It's great to have so many of those familiar faces in the ideas room and all the new people here. Thank you so much for joining us. This is the Dark Journalist Show. And we're just going over these updates around the COG, continuity of government, Newsweek controversy, accusing President Trump of launching martial law while admitting to the fact of actually planning illegally contingency military plans outside of the realm of the commander-in-chief. That's called, you know, completely off the hook activity. And we're going to be looking into that some more. And I got into the dust up where they referred to my stuff as Captain Kangaroo. Somebody, there were some good people in the comment section on that, and they came up with this picture of Captain Kangaroo, and there he is, the captain himself. But behind him is one of those COG people saying, nope, nope, don't say it. Don't say it was O'Shaughnessy. So the picture was leaked. The captain had it. Reuters, okay, and we'll leave off on this. U.S. to allow small drones to fly over people and at night. This is a new rule. It just kicked in today. Small drones will be allowed to fly over people and at night in the United States, the Federal Aviation Administration said on Monday, a significant step toward their use of widespread commercial deliveries. This is very much in line with what they've been up to. We've also seen stories this week about vaccine passports. You won't be able to get on a plane unless you take this DNA altering RNA vaccine. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that you do stop. And, you know, we may all have to find our way down to City Hall before this is over, because the plans that they're rolling out, they're going high speed, and it'll be okay anyway, because no one's going to have any jobs if Biden gets in, so no problem. But this is, I think, the nature of the situation we're looking at. Hopefully, instead, cooler heads prevail and better circumstances go down, because I think between the election and some of the things we're looking at, it could be a very bumpy ride. But we'll all be tuned in here with each other, and thank you so much. During the course of the year, you've sent me incredible things for stories and ideas, and I just appreciate it. It's beyond gracious on your part. We will be back with you this coming weekend, and then January 8th, we'll be back with the X Series 3-parter to blow your mind. And it's great to have everyone here. I'll do a couple of shout outs. Of course, Groovy holding the fort together. Thank you so much. Deborah, it's great to see you out there. Kimber, fantastic. Catherine Harris, Scarlet Fire, Shelby Cobra, Kimber, Jack Doherty, Velociraptor, that's an interesting name. I have to look into that one. Bruce Ross Morgan, it's great to see you, sir. Esoteric369 Wall, excellent. I know I saw Kate out there. It's great to see you. Kat Goida, wow, this is a great crowd tonight. Liberty Thunder, the man, the myth, Pyramid 7, Najat, CC Jarvis, wow, Great. Everyone is out here tonight. This is fantastic. We will see you all this weekend. And remember to sign up again for the free newsletter at darkjournalist.com. And thank you so much for your support. Those of you who contributed tonight to the show, thank you. That makes all the difference and helps us to continue to bring these types of reports to you. And to all our subscribers, thank you for 2020 and for keeping us going as we're trying to get to the root of so many of these things. Pyramid 7, there he is. The man, the myth. Oh, that's great. Carl Jung, spelt in a very interesting way. Now we're talking. Jennifer, Lois Wolf, Patty Jackson, thank you so much. And Happy New Year, everyone. It'll be a great 2021. A tip of my hat to Groovy Bean. It's great to see you out there. So much good news happening along with all the weird news as well. We will see you all this weekend coming up and into 2021. And of course, don't miss on January 8th, the kickoff of the X series 3-parter, X100, part 1 of 3. Thanks so much, everyone. And have a great night. Have a great Tuesday. And you know, it says end broadcast, but of course, it never really ends, does it? Have a great night. Dark Truth, Frank Bunday. Marco Zerpa, Happy New Year. Carol Kremlish, Happy New Year to you. Shelby. Fubar, Fighter. Wow, great crowd tonight. Thanks so much, everyone. See you in COG 2021.
In a remote area of northwest Greenland, an international team of scientists has made a stunning discovery. Buried beneath nearly a kilometer of ice, it's an impact crater, 300 meters deep, 31 kilometers wide, much bigger than Washington, D.C.
And we are live. This is Dark Journalist. What a fantastic crowd we have out there already. And I see Groovy Bean running the ship out there. The election and some of the things, the difference, and helps us. Dark Truth, Frank Bunday. Marco Zerpa, Happy New Year. Carol Kremlish, Happy New Year to you. Shelby. Fubar, Fighter. Wow, great crowd tonight. And we are live. This is Dark Journalist. What a fantastic crowd we have out there already. And I see Groovy Bean running the ship out there. It's good to see you, Groovy. We're going to have a nice, really deep insight update here on everything that's been going on. We'll do about an hour tonight.